Okay, the embassy and how it got started, right. I tell you who were the real organisers. The original people who had the idea of the embassy was Chicka Dixon, the great Chicka Dixon, and Kevin Gilbert. And Kevin Gilbert Chicka Dixon got together with, I think, the Communist Party of Australia and got a donation of $60 for petrol. And I don't know where the car came from or the umbrella. But Chicka had these young lads that he was sort of mentoring, I suppose, informally. And he saw them as potential leaders of the future. And they were unemployed, of course, being Aboriginal. And he set them off on the road to Canberra with their umbrella. Kevin actually went in the car with those poor young fellas, but Kevin was not long released from jail, and he was on parole, so he was not allowed to leave the environs of the New South Wales. So when the car got up here to the Canberra border, they pulled over and let Kevin get out. So the remaining four, and you know who they are, you know, Billy Craigie and so on and so on. I've just got a really bad memory for names, but you've seen them all written around time and time again, the poor young fellas who set up the umbrella. The next day, someone came and donated a tent, and that was the beginning of the Aboriginal Embassy. That beautiful signage that they used to have, which somewhere is in the depths and the bowels of the Department of Aboriginal Affairs as it was. We know it ended up there, but that beautiful signage of Aboriginal Embassy was written by Bobby McLeod, who had been trained as a signwriter. And we all know Bobby McLeod, who was one of the longest long-term residents of the embassy. So there were these young blokes set up here, and at first there was a great deal of support for the embassy because the referendum in 67 giving Aboriginal people more rights under the Constitution, under Section 51 of the Constitution, and I've forgotten the other one. Anyway, you all know your history. I take it for granted you know your history. So we had such general support then that support carried through to the embassy. And there were busloads and busloads and busloads of tourists who came through, sometimes right on each other's heels, other times there wouldn't be 3 minutes between one bus and the next. So every time a bus would pull up to go to Parliament House, which we now call the old Parliament House, they would, all the tourists would pile off, and the first thing they would do would be to head over to the embassy and start making donations. And that's how we overcame the huge problem that is involved in maintaining a long-term demonstration. People have to be fed. Well, in this case, they did a bit of drinking as well. Have to acknowledge that. After a couple of months, we went up to Cowra and came back with a whole lot of Cowra people for National Aborigines Week, and we had a march from the ANU to the embassy grounds at that time. And then a little later on, the government, we knew they were trying to pull the embassy down. Now, the way the laws happened in the ACT at that time, they had no ACT Legislative Assembly. They just had to have Federal Parliament note an ordinance in the Government Gazette. And by being gazetted, immediately it became law. No ifs, buts or maybes, it was law. But you still had 2 weeks. You could be arrested under those laws, but we still had 2 weeks in which we could apply for that law to be wiped out. So Bobby Sykes and Gary Foley and I signed, there's that bloody I word again, we signed, took out a writ against the federal government to stop them from enacting this law on a permanent basis. And eventually it was passed in our favour that the government could not stop the embassy by this widespread, no camping in the ACT on Crown land. So this was how the embassy was able to be established as the second time in January 1973. In the meantime, the embassy was waiting for the ordinance. We were waiting for the ordinance. Now, the ordinance was published every Thursday morning and due to come off the presses at 10 o'clock in the morning. So for weeks we had been waiting every Thursday to see if the ordinance was coming out. And at that time I'd got myself a job on the telephones as a switchboard operator at the Office of Aboriginal Affairs. And then suddenly they decided that I might be a security risk. Of course, sitting there with all these telephones in front of me, they thought I would actually have the time to sit and listen in on conversations. It's so ridiculous. But anyway, with 20 minutes notice, and I suspect somebody very friendly, very high up in the Office of Aboriginal Affairs, moved me from the switchboard down here in Civic to the government printer's office, where I was given a very menial job, a mindless job, a moronic job. Any monkey could have done it. And at that meaningless, mindless job, I was in the government printer's office, which meant that this is where the ordinance was going to be published. So I came into work one Thursday morning, and at 10 to 9, there was a door conveniently left about 4 inches open, and because I'm pretty deaf and can't always hear what's said, there was a very loud voice said, "Hurry up with that first ordinance because the police are waiting for it." So of course I knew what the police were waiting for it for. So there was one main phone in the office, and I thought, will I or won't I? Will I risk 15 years in clink for disclosing secrets obtained during my employment with the government, or will I spread the word? So the ordinary workers didn't even have a phone, so we went to the boss's phone, and I said, look, I need to make a phone call. So I tried to ring the university and tell the students at the university that the embassy was under attack. And I couldn't do that because the government, in its wisdom, had blocked all the phone calls in and out of the university from 8 o'clock in the morning until 3 o'clock that afternoon. So there were absolutely no telephone calls going through there. So I went back to my seat, and will I or won't I, what can I do? Eventually I said, look, to the boss, look, I'm sick, I've got to go home. I got out of the building, went to the nearest public phone, rang my babysitter and said I might not be there to pick up the child, rang a non-Aboriginal friend of mine and said, make sure if I'm not there that you pick up the child. And then I rang the left-wing students' house where they used to fly the blue flag with the white stars and cross on it, the Eureka flag. So the Young Socialists, and I rang the Young Socialist students and said, look, the embassy's under attack. There were about 6 people who were permanent residents at the embassy at that time, and they included Ambrose Golden Brown, who was a lovely man, you saw him there on that film, and Bobby McLeod, and I think Alan Shipley or Shipway, and I can't recall the others, I truly can't. The memory is gone, and I think this is probably the last time I'll be straining it to go back through these recollections. Anyway, the message came, the young students got to the uni and they brought more students with them, so that instead of just 6 people being there at 10 o'clock, we actually had 30 people. And when we had 30 people, that's when the police were all standing around in part of the crowd. And there were about 70 of them. So we locked hands around the tent, locked arms, and they knocked us aside like 10 pins. And they pulled down the tent, and Paul Coe ended up on the ground and with 6 or 7 police kicking into him. He ended up in hospital for 3 days with 3 broken ribs and quite a lot of bruising. Then, you know, there were a number of people who were arrested. I think on that occasion they only arrested men who looked Aboriginal.